Hi everyone, in this segment we'll be looking at the solo taxonomy and how it is useful in crafting standards in the design of a rubric. You'll be familiar with this visual representation of the solo taxonomy. I'd like to draw your attention to the use of hand signs in teaching students about the solo levels. Here at the pre-structural level, students have no understanding. At the unistructural level, students have an idea. At the multi-structural level, they have several ideas, but they are disconnected. At the relational level, a more coherent understanding and the ideas are well linked. For the extended abstract level, students are able to understand these ideas in new and different ways. So it's helpful to point out to students that the shift from pre-structural, unistructural to multi-structural levels of understanding is a quantitative difference, whereas the difference as we move from relational to extended abstract is a qualitative difference in terms of complexity of the ideas being understood. In this diagram by Biggs and Tang in 2011, what they have done is to map sample verbs against the solo levels to indicate the levels of understanding. Does the use of these sample verbs remind you of a certain other taxonomy we are more familiar with? Were you thinking about the Bloom's taxonomy? The Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive objectives is framed as 6 levels, comprising knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. One of the things you will notice about the Bloom's taxonomy is that it provides a good range of different cognitive objectives which can be understood and utilized separately. This makes it easy to incorporate them when designing learning objectives in a curriculum or a lesson plan. For example, when a teacher requires students to evaluate an idea, he need not incorporate the previous 5 cognitive objectives in the lesson plan. The cognitive objective of evaluation can be understood in its own right. In contrast, the solo taxonomy, staying true to its emphasis on relational meaning, contains levels of learning that can only be understood in relation to each other. So the idea of a unistructured outcome has no meaning unless it is understood in relation to the notion of relational outcomes. The interrelatedness of the solo taxonomy emphasizes the potential for using the logical progression in its hierarchy. In fact, a claim of the solo taxonomy is that its logical differences between the levels are easily understood even to students, thus giving them insights on their learning gaps. This makes the solo taxonomy a marvelous tool for engaging and co-opting students' involvement in their learning. For example, it is easier for students to understand the difference between unistructural and multistructural outcomes as opposed to the difference between application and synthesis objectives. The solo taxonomy is not meant as a replacement for the Bloom's taxonomy. Clearly, there is room for both taxonomies to be used together to some extent for students' benefit. Let's think about how these two taxonomies are linked. Would you agree that one of the most direct ways of using both taxonomies is to understand the relational level of learning in the solo taxonomy as the direct equivalent of the synthesis objective in the Bloom's taxonomy? This has practical advantages. At times, stating a learning outcome as a synthesis objective may allow teachers and students to understand synthesis as the complete attainment of learning. Such a dead-end perspective stifles inquiry and depicts learning as closed-ended and self-contained. But if a synthesis objective can be likened to a relational level of understanding, then students can be prompted to think about the extended abstract potential of a synthesized learning outcome. So we can think of then the Bloom's taxonomy as offering end goals of cognitive outcomes and solo learning outcomes as processes on how to move from one level of understanding to another. Earlier, we have looked at one way to craft rubrics from a nested or layered approach by drawing reference from curriculum documents. Now we're going to look at how we can begin to craft standards in the rubrics based on our understanding of the theory of solo levels. In applying solo to rubrics, what the taxonomy offers us is a way of communicating standards using the 5 levels of understanding. In this solo informed rubric, the construct that is being assessed is students' ability to apply the principles of inquiry in the design of the experiment. And specifically, the criteria that is being looked at in this rubric is students' use of materials and apparatus in the experiment. I'd like you to notice what is the solo level of understanding at the extended abstract level. Here, students are expected to make accurate judgment on the measurement and dimension of the materials to be able to judge to what extent they are suitable for the purpose of the experiment. This is an example of a solo informed rubric that's specific to a particular essay question. Again, I'd like you to notice what is being communicated as a level of learning at the extended abstract level. Here, students not only make connections to the universal issues of good governance, they have to situate it to the Singapore context. So they have to think about these ideas in new and different ways. Before we work on our applied learning, I'd like to point out one key principle in designing rubrics. Did you assess what you claim to be assessing? Can others trust your assessment result? These two questions undergird the key principle of validity as we design or redesign our rubrics. At this juncture, I invite you to apply your learning in developing a rubric. You can think about the context of your assessment challenge from day one, or choose a commonly used criteria in your subject area and create standards for just a criterion. When you're thinking about your criterion, focus on important skills and concepts in the domain, not just the task itself. And look out for construct underrepresentation and construct irrelevant variants. When you're thinking about your standards, ensure that they are qualitatively different from each other. You may refer to exemplar rubrics on the Google site as needed. You can afford to spend about half an hour on this task and post your work on Blackboard discussion board after that.